We are on lesson 16 sounds right to me. Oh, and no wonder you're looking at me funny. You said, Pat, I thought it was supposed to be Al today. And it was. But Al and I talked, we were talking about nominating committee, and he said, I'm swamped at work. And I said, would it help if I took it today? And so that's why you're having to put up with me. We'll try to get Al in here in the real near future. But he's swamped at work, so another thing to definitely keep in prayer. Our brother Al. Good works. Wave at me if you've done a good work lately. Good works. How do we know what's good? Okay. We're on, by the way, page 27. Good works. I struggled some with it. So much so that I had to call up Dr. Kent Matthews and ask him some questions. I wouldn't call up Dr. Kent Matthews. I emailed him and said, can I ask you some questions? And then he called me. And once again, what you have in front of you is not what would be on the slide or what I'm going to read here. What I'm going to read is a paraphrase. What God has commanded and identified as good is what is good. See, what God has commanded and identified as good is what is good. Works that don't fall into this category are not good, no matter how excited and well-intentioned people are about them. God gets to choose what's good. We don't. Is it good to give your child a gift?
Yes.
Is it always good to give your child a gift? It is quite deliberate. We're back to the question we worked with a little bit last time, where Alonda was proposing a solution for how we deal with the individuals on the traffic island.
Oh, yeah.
And that's one of the questions that I posed to Dr. Matthews was, okay, if I give the guy $5 and he goes and does something inappropriate with it, I'm off the hook, right? Because I didn't know he was going to do that. And he kind of took me down all of the roads that you can go. And finally, he got me to see that you can go into this huge spiral trying to figure out what exactly is a good work. And that's not productive because the action has to be consistent with God's will, and it needs to proceed from the heart, from a right heart toward God. This is the one that I had to really wrestle with. Okay, so and on the slide I have a quote from Dr. Matthews. He said to me, and I went, oh, because I didn't know you could say this. He said, "What the way I define good works is not the way the Westminster defines good works." And I gasped because I didn't know we could do that. I know it's not infallible. Whatever is consistent with the will and character of God, this includes thoughts as well as actions and even restraint from actions, in a word, obedience. Okay, so he isn't contradicting the Westminster so much as he's expanding on it and saying not only what's explicitly commanded, but what is consistent with God's character. And the fact that he included even thoughts. When I start to think about thoughts, that's a whole other thing. So in a word, obedience. So all of you are redeemed. All of you are believers, right?
Yeah.
So if that's true, pretty good guess that you've done some good works in the last week. But if I were to go back through and try to categorize which what I've done actually counted, that's probably not a useful exercise. One of my favorite verses, but I didn't think of it in this light until I did this lesson, is Micah 6:8. Can somebody get Micah 6:8? Melissa, are you quick with your little phone Bible there?
Well, I got the...
Oh, you got the real deal. Okay. Whoever gets it. Whoever gets
the one I'm thinking of, I can probably quote it from memory.
I bet you can. I bet you can.
Yeah, that was the one I was thinking of. He has showed you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, to act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
What does the Lord require of you but to, and another translation says, do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. That's all you have to do. No big deal. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. brief aside. We used to say this in, I need my air quotes, chapel at William Jewell as part of the benediction, but they changed the word humbly to wisely. And I asked why they did that, and there's some kind of debate about the translation in some obscure thing, but most all translations have humbly.
I wonder if Milton was part of that decision. Yes, he was.
It seems like humbly and wisely is a really big difference.
Oh, yeah. My colleague, who was indeed the one that Ted mentioned, was kind of trying to explain to me that they're, in God's sight, they're the same thing, and they are. I mean, in terms of what would be wise would also be humble, but not what we're doing.
Wisdom almost implies that you have control instead of humbly. Is what, when you talk about being in God's character, being consistent with God's will, but when you say wisely, it almost sounds like I'm wise.
Sounds
I'm
like
doing something because I'm wise. It's like it's putting the.
It's back to me.
Yeah.
I know better.
Like to me. Huh.
To walk.
Many who are not wise are very humble.
Yeah.
That's also right. That's also true. They are by no means synonyms. In any case, and I have sung that verse and recited that verse, and I thought, I'm embarrassed to say, but sometimes I thought, well, no, that's not all of that he requires. Well, yes, it is. It is, because if we do that, we will love the Lord our God with all our heart and all our soul.
And our neighbors as ourselves.
And our neighbors as ourselves, exactly. So my conclusion to this slide after talking to Dr. Matthews was, it is possible and probably not helpful to run in circles trying to identify exact good works. Because as we talked, I find really, why was I trying to count up my or anyone else's good works? That's just silly. Go and do it. Forget yourself. But I love that he pointed out that thoughts are a part of it as well. Okay. I called the second point there on your page, good works are fruits. Good works follow directly from a living faith, and thus from a desire to please God. By them we give thanks, build up the body, increase in our steadiness in faith, and show God's glory to others. They help respond to criticism inspired by the enemy of the faith. So, sometimes people will fall into a trap. Okay, we're saved by grace, right? We're not saved by works. None of our works are going to get us saved. So why do we have to do good works at all? Right? Why even bother? Well, here's all of the reasons. And Dr. Matthews boiled it down to this. I love the way he put it. He said it's an important fruit. It speaks to ourselves of the genuineness of our salvation. That our good works narrate to us that indeed we are saved. Has anybody ever, for a moment of time, doubted their salvation? Any of you? I don't. It doesn't happen to me often, but I have. Yeah, thinking, do I really believe? And much less so now than before. One of the things that the good works do is say, okay, if I'm doing good works, that means they're proceeding from the heart. They are pleasing to God. Yes, I am saved. And that's behind the statement that when we are saved, when we truly embrace Christ, there will be a life change. I could point to about 4 or 5 times in my life where at least some people would describe it as my conversion to Christianity, beginning at about I'd gone to church all my life. But beginning at about age 18, and there will be several points. But in terms of a life change, changing the way I behave in the long run, changing the way that I lived and for what I lived.
Your thinking?
Sir?
And your thought?
And my thinking, my whole, as we like to say on campus, a worldview. I don't know that did happen before age 44.
Wow.
I just don't know. The example that Matthews used, he said he did something to receive Christ, accepted Christ, something when he was 12, but then went on into high school, college, and his terms, not mine, sowed his wild oats, and so he would say that not until after that did he in fact have saving faith. That's where I take such comfort in the Reformed theology, where I don't have to figure out exactly who has saving faith. I can make a pretty good guess sometimes, I think. If C.S. Lewis wasn't saved, I don't think there's any hope for me. But I don't actually know, which is, at least for me, a huge comfort when we have a hero of the faith fall in some way. I don't need to name names, you know some of the ones I'm talking about. But and I don't know whether they fall from faith or somebody fall in terms of behavior. But that I can invite my friend to accept Christ. They can pray the sinner's prayer. Do I absolutely know that they're saved? No, I don't. I only know for sure about me. But there will be evidence. I love the book of James. Let's see. Debbie, could you get James 2:18 to 22? James 2:18 to 22.
Someone will say, "You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without works, and I will show you faith from my works. You believe that God is one, you do well. The demons also believe and they shudder."
Thank you. The end of that, I remember hearing a preacher in Lutheran Chapel one time saying that we think Satan is an atheist. We think he doesn't believe in God. Not true. He does. James is big on faith and works are going to go together. Luther didn't like the book of James initially, during the early part of the Reformation. He had some doubts as to whether it should remain in the canon. Now I'm told that he changed his view on that, which I think is wise. But you see what James is about here. Works are going to be there. Okay, so I knew somebody who was a Christian and a vital Christian and on the mission field and always caring for people, and now they don't want anything to do with the faith. What do I do with that? I continue to love them. I continue to preach to them. We're hearing, I'm told, I don't know as much about it, we're hearing of several popular Christian singers who have renounced the faith, or say they have. Only God knows on the heart, but there will be evidence. Showing forth Christ. I do want to do this one. Melissa, could you get Ephesians 2:10? Ephesians 2:10.
To answer your question about giving.
About
giving, in the Sermon on the Mount, both Matthew and in Luke, Jesus says, "Give to everyone who asks of you. And do not withhold somebody who wants to borrow from you." I don't like that because I don't believe that all these homeless people are who they say they are, but still, those are the instructions.
This is when we need Dr. Matthews or Pastor Luke to pop in, I think, because
Did he tell you about that in his answer?
I'm sorry?
Did he quote that in his answer?
No, but we were down a kind of different road, trying to figure out whether it made a difference what the person did with it. I have told myself, perhaps wrongly, that the give to everyone who asks you has some kind of context around it. That he doesn't literally mean that if I go, "Tom, please give me $100," Tom is then bound to give me $100. But yeah, I will study on that one. Did you find that, Melissa?
For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do.
Yes.
Don't you love it? That He prepared these good works in advance. When I get to thinking about that part of the sovereignty of God, my head just spins. Next week in the sermon, I'll talk about little Landon. So you've heard me mention Landon before. Matthew from the CRU group and I met Landon. He was walking up the street and all sad, and Matthew engaged him in conversation and was able to minister to him a little bit. And he brought his dog for us to see. And Landon has been coming to Art in the Park every week. And he stays with us from start to finish. And he really wants to come to church. And we're praying for an opportunity to meet his parents, or parent or parents. It's kind of a complicated situation there. But all that to say, Landon was coming up the street. And we had gotten a late start that day. And we had dawdled at a couple of houses for complicated reasons. And Matthew pointed out to me that timing was God's, that we would have missed Landon. And like from eternity, he knew that we were going to run into little Landon. I mean, that God's foreknowledge is that big about our good works. Okay, but your breath to say something, Ted.
Oh, no.
Okay.
I love that.
But
It's our predestination.
our good works build up the body. Have you seen that happen? Have you seen good works building up the body? Oh, lots. Yeah, every time deacons minister to somebody. A kind word. Louis was telling me about a day when Dennis was kind of standing off by himself, and he engaged Dennis in conversation. Good works build up the body. In the text you have in front of you, it uses the word ornaments. And when I saw that, I went, ew, ornaments, because I think of like Christmas ornaments on a tree. That is, but they're visible signs that other people see. So there would be impact even on non-Christians, right?
Oh, yeah.
Good works, even on impact on non-Christians. I bet each of you could tell a story of when you have responded to something differently than somebody would expect because you're a Christian, right? I'm not going to ask you for your stories right at the moment, though I'd love to hear them at some point. But frequently, a friend of mine ran into a guy in a parking lot, and the guy went out and got in his face, and he was cursing him up a blue streak, and the man who was pastor said, "You're right. I'm sorry. I was wrong, and I hope you'll forgive me, and I do have insurance, and I will take care." I mean, he was kind and gentle with this guy, and the guy was, whoa. He didn't know how to take this, because I'm swearing at you, and you're being nice to me. Right. Having people, seeing people give money when you know it's an expense, when you know it's a hardship to them. Seeing the Voice of the Martyrs people continue their faith visibly at all.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. May God be pleased it doesn't happen, but I'm far from sure of my reaction if somebody sticks a gun in my face and says, "Are you a Christian?" If you say yes, you die. But they face that all of the time.
They do.
Whoa. And we see that because we read Voice of the Martyrs, but the world sees that too, most definitely. Okay. Point 3, I call it good works are responses. In doing good works, we respond to the Spirit's direction, for He knows what pleases God. However, we are not to sit around waiting for a word from God before acting. If we are earnestly praying for the Spirit to guide us and open us to that guidance, be assured there will be direction enough for us. Okay, so two big chunks of that. On the one hand, if we do a good work, it's a fruit of the Spirit, right? It did not, in fact, originate with us. But now, as odd as it may sound, I think it's true that I was an active participant in the so-called charismatic movement in the 70s before I was a Christian, which sounds quite weird. But one of the things that we would sometimes do is, in those days we had landlines, no cell phones, and the phone would ring. And we would pray whether we were led to answer the phone or not. Which author is it? Is it Spurgeon or MacDonald that tells of the lady who would pray about whether she should put on one sock and then would pray about whether she should put on the other sock? I don't know that as Presbyterians we're given to that kind of extreme, but I don't hear a word from God in itself is not a good enough excuse for not being out there doing good works. Now, that's different from I'm waiting for a word for God for what we should do. We were talking about that a little bit last week. Okay. I love the phrase that Pastor Luke often says, God always speaks clearly. Oh, when were we talking about that? We were talking about that in session, right? That's what. Maybe we could rehab a little bit of that conversation because I think it's extremely important. So can you paraphrase a little bit about what you said about waiting
Well,
on
I
God's
just
guidance?
said that, I do believe that, except there are times where I still question whether I'm really hearing what I think I'm hearing is, is it really from God, or am I convincing myself that it's from God because it's really from me? I sometimes question those things.
Oh my goodness, yeah. And anybody been there? You're needing to make a major or minor decision. Should I go back to work? Should I move here or there? Should I ask this person to marry me? Whatever. And you kind of think, what you're supposed to do, but not exactly. And I don't have a good answer for that, except that the more I embrace that idea that he does speak clearly, the more I find I usually have to wait for it, and he eventually does speak clearly. And we ran across, in continuing that conversation over text, we ran across a passage, and I should have written it down. It's from Habakkuk, and it's, if you are waiting for the vision and it seems like it's not coming, wait for it, it will not be delayed. God's not going to usually put a little voice in your head. God's rarely going to give you a vision. But in terms of directing our steps, he is. And what drives me crazy is the waiting part. Oh, I've got plenty to do. That's no problem. It's that I have this big decision to make, and I want to know so I can do all. Well, no, you don't. You don't need to know yet. I want there's something wrong with my body. I want to know all that is going to happen. And waiting on God. There's going to be plenty to do. And one of the things I'm learning in trying to minister to my mom, who has severe dementia now, is that often we're doing good works when we're not aware of it. Mom is in my view, a relatively new Christian. She made her first official profession of faith in Christmas Eve. So understandably, she's new to some of this. And she will often say, well, I just wish God would take me because I'm useless. And so we got back over, Mom, no one is useless in God's sight, and he is using you. And she does. She uplifts other people. All that to say, often we're doing good works and not even aware of it. In fact, I wonder if we couldn't say that most of the time, when we're doing truly good works, that is right-headed, we're not aware of it. Because our head isn't in us. Oh, we love to self-reflect in psychology. One of my favorite pieces of funny research was about your perception of my perception of your perception of me. What? As one very dear student said to me, get your head out of yourself, Dr. Pat. He said, if my eyes are closed.
An example of that, without going too much into it, is this past week, someone said to my sister Lisa, something that she had said to them was something that they had touched, something that had been weighing on them, and she had, in a conversation with them, said something that helped them get clarity on that, but also that they had just pondered that one thing she said, and it wasn't like I think that's an example of what you're saying. She did a good work there she didn't really think that through, or it wasn't necessarily a big plan, but God used her to somehow speak to something that this person was worried about, and so you don't always know, like there's things you say. I mean, I've had that happen as a teacher. There's something I've said that's really kind of offhand that I find out later stayed with this little kid for a long time.
Wow.
And I had no idea that it had that power. So I think that has to be God. I mean, that God knows what that person needed to hear, and he used me to say that. wasn't anything to do with me, but.
And praise God for the student or the friend who comes back and says that this happened, that this meant something to me. Oh yeah, because probably when you're in the classroom, you're probably not in the moment necessarily actively thinking about God and praying and so on. You're focused on the kiddos, yet the Holy Spirit is guiding you. Oh my goodness, yes.
The opposite is probably true too.
Yes,
You could say something casually that might offend somebody or hurt them.
exactly.
And not be aware of that either. So,
Oh my
And
goodness.
that's always a fear, that was always a fear of mine, you know, that, yeah.
but, well, you were surrendered to God.
Mhm.
Your job.
Yeah, exactly. But the Spirit prompts these works, and yet we do them freely. The Spirit prompts them, yet it's a matter of our free will. We're not robots responding to the Spirit, even at our best. Another thing Dr. Matthews pointed out as we talked about this, that I may not agree with a particular approach, yet still be called to help address the problem. For example, I don't have much patience with what some are calling critical race theory. I don't think the what's called the social justice movement is very right-headed about bettering race relations. But that doesn't get me off the hook, as my daughter reminds me with some frequency. That does not get me off the hook in terms of needing to love my neighbor, actively seek to get to know people of all types, and communicate in a way that is beyond any demographic barriers. I still am called to help address the problem. Okay. Then 4, I called it our human best doesn't come close. And this is something we know, but I have to keep on being reminded of it. How many of you know a really, really, really good Christian? Somebody that all the time practices their faith, and you know they're sinners, of course, because everybody is, but you don't give any names. I know. Okay. But even that person, God's pretty pleased with that person, right? Well, the very best works of the very best, in quotes, very best works of the very best Christians don't come close to meeting the standard that God requires. All fail in much of what God has commanded. That's why we need Jesus. And that's, like we were talking about last week, what the world so often completely misses. We just don't do sin in psychology. Anybody heard of, this is going back a ways, but the name Carl Menninger, the Menninger Clinic? I guess it's say Menninger around here. And Menninger was one of the few really Christian psychiatrists I've ever heard of. And he wrote a book called Whatever Happened to Sin, and was calling psychiatry back and culture back to acknowledgement of sin. Now this so intrigued me. Evidently, the Catholic Church has, and I'm not ragging on Catholics, I have many good Christian Catholic friends, a teaching called supererogation. And the way that supererogation works is that some saints have done so much good that they have and other people can draw credits. So you would kind of, I'm not exactly sure how you get the credits, but like St. Francis of Assisi, maybe he's one of them, would have a whole bunch of extra good works to his account. So given certain rituals, you could draw on that, and then you would be covered in terms of your salvation. It's one of those things that it sounds so 21st century economy that I think, how in the world did we get there? But I just thought it was interesting that it came up. On the contrary, the very best of Christians do not come close to satisfying God's standard. You remember in, I think it's Galatians or Romans, where Paul is saying, the good that I would do, I don't do, and the bad that I wouldn't do, I do, and he's just tearing his hair out, and oh, wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of Christ? But thanks be to God, and he lands back on the victory for Christ. I'm aware that I'm talking too much, and I was determined that I wasn't going to ask for grace of time today. Okay, I called point 5, good works don't earn forgiveness or help God. I think that last part we sometimes find. No works individually or together could earn forgiveness or even help to do so. When I first began to practice fasting on occasion, I was just about 6 months ago, I was really new to it. And I thought, well, God's going to be even more pleased with me now that I'm fasting. Well, it doesn't work. He teaches much, but it doesn't work quite that way. God doesn't need anything from us, and even what we do for his glory doesn't help him. Whatever goodness there is in the works comes from the Spirit, just doing our jobs. And here I'm going to quote a former student named Landon Grace. Isn't that a wonderful name for a Christian? He was a Liberty police officer, and now he's a ICE agent on California. And he won an award for alumni contribution. And when he went up to receive the award, he said, "Thank you, but I can't imagine why I'm getting this. I'm just doing my job." And it really touched me because I knew some of what he'd been through. But that's us, right? God, look at the cool thing I did for you. Just doing my job at the best of it. Can somebody
That's
get
biblical.
unworthy servant?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
Luke 17. Can somebody get Isaiah 64:6, please? And I will, in fact, need 4 minutes of grace. Could I get 4 minutes of grace? Okay. Isaiah 64:6, somebody.
All of us have become like something unclean, and all our righteous acts are like a polluted garment. All of us wither like a leaf, and our iniquities carry us away like the wind.
All our righteous acts is are like a polluted garment. This really cool thing that I did, this way I witnessed to this really scary person, it's just yuck. Seriously? I had a dear Baptist friend tell me not to quote that passage because it would prevent people from doing good works. Because they would think, oh, we can't help God. We can't add to God. We know this. But don't we sometimes react as if we think God didn't need our help? Do you ever catch yourself doing that? Reacting as if God... I've actually heard myself say, God, I have an idea how we might... Oh. You have an idea. Whenever I run ahead of God, whenever I make a major decision without consulting him, I'm behaving as if he needed my help in some way.
But he wants your help.
He wants my participation.
That's the fine line between doctrinally these points of view. He still wants us to do things, and he still prepared them for us beforehand to do.
He did.
And he arranges divine meetings for them to occur.
Oh yeah.
So he doesn't need help, but he wants it. The only place I will depart from what you're saying is I won't use the term help because we can't help him. He doesn't need our assistance, but by his grace he's allowing us to participate in his plan. I think we're saying kind of the same thing. Oh yeah, but and I mean that's such a given for us as Reformed people, but the notion that we could help out God, it doesn't sound strange at all to most people in the world. There's a little bit God, a little bit. I really think that's what I thought Christianity was as a child. You call upon God when the cat is missing, or when your brother stuck something strange up his nose or something. Those both really happen. We have the popular phrase where Christ's hands and feet, or love with skin on it. Those are things that came out of the modern church recently. And, yes and no. God is able from these rocks to raise up children to Abraham. He can also take a persecutor like Saul, turn him into Paul. And that's still happening today. So.
Oh my goodness, yes. The closest I can get is when a little kid helps you, and you don't really need the help, and they're even going to make a bigger mess of it. When Xander and I are going up a hill, I remember Xander's 3 years old, and he'll turn around and say, "You need help, Gaga?" And he'll offer a little hand. I mean, if I have a misstep, I can pull that little kid down, but oh my goodness, it's so, I so rejoice that he cares for me in that way. The relationship with the Son is the acceptability of the works to the Father. It's because we are in relationship with his Son. There was an old, I think, kind of country song, looking through the eyes of love when she looks at me. And God is looking at our works through the eyes of love, through the eyes of his Son. And that's why, although in and of themselves they are filthy rags, he sees something wonderful and glorious and heartwarming just as surely as I do. Okay, now here was the one I really had to wrestle with. Point 7, the works of the unregenerate, that is, the unsaved, no matter how apparently noble, are not good works. No. Not discovering penicillin, not the telescope, not feeding 5,000 hungry people, not because it doesn't proceed from a heart that's right before God. Helpful? Absolutely. Good in the world's terms? Absolutely. Good in God's terms? No. Okay? And if you're like me, sometimes you struggle with, well, there was this person, I know them, atheists, agnostics, or self-proclaimed atheists, I'm not sure I believe they are, who do cool things, discover things that help people. Yes, they help people. Yes, God is using them as surely as God used the kings of the kings of Israel's opponents.
Yeah.
But good works before God? No. But how could God reject someone who does all these things that they have rejected God? Seeming to follow the law, but with no heart will not do. We wouldn't have time, but I had a verse from Amos 5 in there where he says, you're giving all these fasts and all these offerings, but your heart's just not in it. So don't even.
Your heart is far from me.
Yeah, they're people, someone that would go to worship just, to look good. It's a matter of the heart, and ultimately it's a matter of our relationship with him, our living, vital relationship with him. And because of that, if I want to see these good works, I've got to keep that relationship vital. So I've got to be here with you. I've got to be studying the Word. It's not enough to turn on the televangelist once a week, say my little prayer, and go away. I have got to be engaged with him. And I close with one of my favorite hymns. I bet we've sung it at some point here. Take my life and let it be. Let me quote some of the lyrics. Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Take my moments and my days, let them flow in endless praise. Take my will and make it thine, it shall be no longer mine. Take my heart, it is thine own, it shall be thy royal throne. Take my love, my Lord, I pour at thy feet its treasure store. Take myself, and I will be ever only all for thee. And Frances Havergal wrote that in 1874, and she was, one of her things to do was to teach, solfa music, solfa or something, the do-re-mi stuff. But she wanted to teach it to young girls so that she could introduce them to Christ. And this is some of what she wrote in a beautiful letter that Frances Ridley Havergal wrote to John Kerwin, in which she described the work to teach tonic solfa music to teenage girls and young women as a means to reach them with the gospel of Christ. She ended with these words: bringing them within hearing of loving and sympathizing words and of the one name which is sweeter than any music. Whether I put $1 in the Salvation Army kettle, or give a hug to the tearful individual, or pray with little Landon, my motivation should be to draw people to Christ. And that's the difference between us and sort of an ordinary social work situation. But I just love the way she put it. And if you haven't recently read the lyrics to Take My Life and Let It Be. So, and I forgot to do the catechism questions, but they'll be better with the slide anyway, so I'll see if I can't get that talking. Ted, would you close us and ask?